boxing is inherently dangerous. We're never going to be able to completely eliminate serious injuries and deaths. They're always going to be there, at least as long as boxing stays in its current form. But over the past year or so, we've unfortunately had a series of tragedies in a relatively short space of time. And people are rightfully asking the question, why is this? What's going on? Why have we had so many in such a short period? Is it simply because there are more shows going on now than there has been in years past? And it's just the law of averages. The more shows you have, the more instances of serious injury you're going to get? Or is it something else going on? Now, we've talked about sparring. I watched an interview the other day. I can't remember who it was with. He was either some boxer on their YouTube channel or an interview somewhere. But they were saying that they've seen fighters involved in sparring wars in training camp for a fight, and they're having to recover from their sparring going into a fight because the sparring was so tough. Fighters carry concussions into fights. That is not uncommon, I'm telling you. So that needs to be looked at. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Joe Goosen who said that before anybody steps into a boxing ring, for every single fight, they need to have a brain scan. And I would certainly like to see that happen, because that would be able to catch any concussions or brain issues which might have occurred in sparring. Now, there could be some unscrupulous promoters who don't want that to happen, because then it makes the risk of the show being cancelled a lot higher, right? Because ordinarily the fight would just go ahead and you don't know what's happened to the fighter in sparring. But if you're having to brain scan the fighter after he's done all his sparring, literally on fight week, and based on the results of the brain scan, the fight will either go ahead or it won't. I mean, some promoters are not going to like that scenario. So there's that which people could implement to make boxing safer. There's also the issue of the gloves and the headgear which they use in training. Now, boxing gloves were never designed, and I'm talking about fight gloves now, they were never designed to protect the opponent. They were designed to protect your hands so that they don't break when you hit the opponent, so that fights can last longer and people can punch harder without fear of breaking bones in their hand. However, when it comes to sparring gloves, there should be an emphasis not only on protecting the hands, because the sparring gloves they make today are the most protective that there's ever been, as far as I'm concerned. Because I remember the sparring gloves back in the 1990s and what have you, and they were nowhere near as protective as the ones you have now. They use advanced type of foams and multi-layered foams and all this kind of stuff today. There are certain types of sparring gloves. If you get a pair of 18-ounce, let's say Rival RV1s, you would be very, very hard pressed to try and break your hand in a pair of 18-ounce Rival RV1s. Unless you've got incredibly brittle hands, very difficult to break your hand in a pair of those, no matter how hard you hit somebody. So they're doing a very good job when it comes to protecting people's hands with the modern sparring gloves. But when it comes to protecting the opponents, a lot of the modern sparring gloves are made from extremely dense foam. So they have extremely dense foam in them. And as far as I'm concerned, that is not going to lessen the impact on sparring partners. I strongly suspect that it's actually going to be more damaging, not only in terms of busting them up, but maybe even neurologically more damaging. And even more disturbing than that, aside from these very, very firm gloves that they often use in professional sparring gloves, very, very firm padding they very often use in professional sparring gloves. As well as that, you've got the headgear. And a lot of this headgear is also made with very firm padding inside. And so I never liked that kind of headgear with this really firm padding. I always felt like the punches hurt more and had more of an effect on me when I was getting hit with a headgear that had really firm padding. So I always liked my headgear to be either very minimal, almost like an amateur contest headgear, or have relatively soft padding in it. Now, obviously with headgear, there's always a break-in period. I've known some people, who get a new headgear and they'll literally sit on the headgear for a whole month. They'll stamp on it. They'll do all kinds of things to it just to break it in and make it a bit more soft before they start wearing it for sparring. Because trust me, if you wear a headgear that's really stiff, it can hurt more with the headgear on when you get hit than without the headgear. So I think there's an issue here with the headgears, man. Perhaps they're making them to try. They're making them with this really stiff foam so that they'll last longer and give them durability. But as far as I'm concerned, that's not what the priority should be. The priority should be the safety of the fighters. So I think that headgear with less dense padding, to me, in my experience of wearing headgear with less dense padding, it feels like it does a better job of absorbing the shock. Thick padding, but less dense, softer, so it has some give in it. Because when you get hit with a hard, stiff headgear, it just feels like it transfers all of the shock into your brain. And I don't care what these manufacturers say about their technology and all the tests they've done. Absolute load of rubbish. Because I've worn these headgears myself and been hit in the headgear. I know what it feels like. So I think the headgears need to be looked at. The sparring gloves need to be looked at in terms of having these really dense foam in the sparring gloves. But there's another thing which I think needs to be looked at. And it isn't just in relation to boxing. Okay, now, I am not a neurobiologist or a neurosurgeon or anything like that, but I have done a little bit of research on the effects that microwave radiation can have on the brain. And microwave radiation specifically emitted from cell phones, right? Mobile phones, as we call them in the UK. Because there has been numerous studies done. And you can see this in mainstream media articles and whatnot, just Google it. Numerous studies done which link cell phone radiation to various neurological disorders and even insomnia. That having a mobile phone next to your head for prolonged periods can actually mess with your sleep because it is emitting microwaves that are interfering with I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but I guess it would be the electrical field of your brain is interfered with from the cell phone radiation. And also, if you look here on this Wikipedia article on mobile phone radiation and health, you can scroll down to the part that talks about the blood-brain barrier. And this is where it may have some relation to boxing. Again, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not saying there is a link to the increase in brain injuries lately when it comes to boxing. But I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. If you read this part that says blood-brain barrier, it says here, several animal studies have demonstrated damage to the blood-brain barrier from phone radiation. So they've shown in laboratories that cell phone radiation can damage the blood-brain barrier of animals. Now, obviously, I don't know how long these animals were exposed to the cell phone radiation. And obviously, an animal skull, if it's something like a rat, a lab rat, is a lot thinner than a human skull. But nonetheless, if cell phone radiation, and it appears as though it definitely can, if it can cause insomnia in human beings, maybe it can also affect the blood-brain barrier of human beings. And if so, would that increase the risk of brain injury from boxing? Again, I'm not a neurobiologist or a surgeon, but, something worth looking at, I think, for those involved in boxing, especially on the scientific end. And just in general, when it comes to human health, cell phone radiation is something people really should consider, because there is no, trust me on this one, I've researched this, there is nowhere near enough research done on the long-term effects of exposure to cell phone radiation and Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. Nowhere near enough research has been done on the long-term effects of those things. So maybe I'll get into that a little bit more on the Patreon. But for now, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. There's, of course, the whole dehydration thing, because that's the reason that they scrapped same-day weigh-ins. See, some people are calling for same-day weigh-ins to be brought back as a response to the brain injuries that are happening in boxing, but they don't realize that same-day weigh-ins were scrapped for that exact reason, that it was increasing the risk of brain injury, because fighters will just dehydrate themselves even more on the day of the fight. So I have mentioned this in previous videos. If you're going to have same-day weigh-ins, in fact, you don't even need a same-day weigh-in for my theoretical or proposed solution. You could just have a doctor who can run some kind of test on each fighter after they've weighed in to see how dehydrated they are. Now, I think somebody responded in the comment section last time I mentioned that, and they said there's no actual way to test for dehydration. If there isn't, there isn't. That with modern medicine and advancements in technology, all the different machines they've got that can measure your fat, amount of fat in your body and all this kind of stuff, surely there's some kind of technology that can measure, the amount of water in your body. Surely there is. There must be some kind of machine or some kind of way of finding out how dehydrated a person is by running some kind of test. And if such a thing exists, then that should be implemented after weigh-ins, so that if you are dehydrated beyond a certain point, you can't fight. Yeah? So that's a potential safety measure. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I'm not claiming I have all the answers and I know exactly why there's more brain damage in boxing taking place over the past year or so. I'm just throwing possibilities out there, okay? Let me know what you think, people. It's happening. I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.